Hello and welcome everyone, it's time to hold my Game of the Year awards for the games I played in 2023. This year, the categories are Biggest Disappointments, the Just Okay Awards, the You've Been Snubbed Awards, and of course, my Game of the Year. Unfortunately, I don't have time to play every single game, and I only play on PC. So if your favorite title was a PS5 or Switch exclusive, or Baldur's Gate 3, I'm sorry. Alright, let's kick off the awards with the biggest disappointments, sponsored by Mothers Worldwide. I don't actively seek out bad games, so luckily this year I don't have a worst game of the year, but it's always a possibility. Some notable titles I actively avoided were Redfall, Forspoken, Rise of Kong, Gollum, the list goes on, so those won't be here, but I think I'm better off keeping my money and my sanity. But fret not, my friends, there are other games that disappointed me, and this year there were 3 of them.
There's no sinking this boat, Glenda.
First up is Cities Skylines II. Where do I begin with this one? I loved Cities Skylines 1, but Cities 2 is about as complete as a cheeseless pizza. Parts of the simulation are broken, sims are as dumb as rocks, and the info tab is missing a lot of helpful information, so it makes it hard to pinpoint problem areas. Parking can be annoying, and there's an unrealistic demand for schools. If you've played Cities 1 with some of the DLC, you'll notice that there are tons of small things missing in 2, and it feels bad because it makes the game feel incomplete and unpolished. However, there are things I really like. For example, it's now much easier to connect roads, and the new zoning types are really cool too. Although, again, there are some balancing issues. Cities Skylines 2 feels like they took 10 steps forward and 9 steps back, making it almost a net zero improvement over the original. Given how much DLC is available for the first game, it's hard to recommend Cities 2 to new players right now. However, it's equally hard recommending Cities 1 since that's effectively a dead platform in my opinion. The modding community is keeping it alive for now, but I think they'll migrate to 2 eventually. The good news is that the developers have shown that they are committed to fixing the game, so I'm hopeful that in due time it can become the city builder it was always meant to be. But currently, it's a slight disappointment. I'm a sucker for alternate histories, cut from the same cloth from stuff such as Man in the High Castle and Prey, the game. Atomic Heart was so intriguing. However, that excitement slowly waned and I was bored after a handful of hours. Considering how no one complained that it was missing from this year's Game Awards, it seemed like most people didn't care that much about it either. Now, I don't think this is a bad game at all. I'm actually more disappointed that it held my attention about as well as each of Henry VIII's wives. Visually, it's very striking and the graphics were great. The retro tech looked like it was straight out of the Cold War, and what seemed like an interesting premise at first, quickly lost its luster. I might revisit this in the future, but for now, I'll put it here. And for the one we've been waiting for. High on Life was the biggest disappointment of the year for me. As a Rick and Morty fan, I was really looking forward to this, but the humor was a complete whiff. It was definitely missing something and I didn't enjoy it at all. Even if I could get past that, the gunplay didn't feel particularly good either, which unfortunately is pretty important. However, the graphics were good and the worlds were interesting, but after a couple of hours, the greatest relief was the uninstall button. Unfortunately, High on Life has fewer redeeming qualities than the previous 2 runner-ups. There's not much to say about this one except congratulations for disappointing me the most. Our second category is the Just Okay Awards. As the name suggests, these games were fine. I wasn't mad that I played them, I wasn't mad that I bought them, but I wasn't overly impressed either. I'm not going to crown a winner here because honestly, if you're on this list, you weren't that special, but I did want to give them a little bit of recognition. Some might put Starfield or Avatar here, but I didn't play them so I wouldn't know. Let me know which games you played that were just okay. With all of that being said, Assassin's Creed Mirage is the greatest OK game of the year. The story wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. I'm just surprised they could make a character so bland. And the chain-smoking grandma didn't help either. The visuals were also a mixed bag. The Middle East was awesome, but the NPCs looked so weird. The parkour was also one of the weakest parts of the game. Again, it wasn't terrible, but considering this is an Assassin's Creed game, it should have been better. What the game does well though is recreate Baghdad and have an awesome soundtrack with some epic music, which is honestly the bare minimum for an Assassin's Creed game nowadays. Ubisoft really needs to get it together and stop taking classes on a pass-fail basis. The next category is the Snubbed Awards. These are games that I thought were very good or even great, but were unfortunately overshadowed in a very competitive year. Let me know in the comments down below which games you think deserved a bit more love. The first game is Hogwarts Legacy, which didn't get a single nomination at the Game Awards. If its exclusion came down to politics, then that's a real shame because that means a single person ruined it for an entire team of developers. Not everything was amazing, but seeing a fully built Hogwarts castle was truly magical. Not only that, every part of the castle was open to explore, with collectibles that were fun to gather. The game's spell slinging was surprisingly fun, the progression was good, and the story was decent. Whether it was running down a hall, flying on a broom, or visiting Hogsmeade and one of its many shops, it was like watching the first movie for the first time all over again. The atmosphere and art direction in that game was incredibly special and deserves some praise. The second game is Star Wars Jedi Survivor. This one is interesting because I love this game, but it deserves to be snubbed because it was plagued with performance issues. However, if you take that out of the equation, there would be very little to complain about. The combat was amazing, the Star Wars universe is richer than the executives at EA, and they crafted a really interesting story that takes place in between the first two trilogies. Jedi Survivor expanded upon the first game and included open world elements, but not to the point where it becomes bloaty and tedious. The actors were great and the music was amazing too. I mentioned in an earlier video that I think broken games should be disqualified from winning Game of the Year, unless there's a day one patch that fixes everything, which rarely ever happens. And to be fair, it wasn't even nominated, but if it did run well on day one, then this would be on the next list. So congrats to whoever made the decision to push it out before it was ready. You screwed your own game. Now, with all the other awards out of the way, it brings us to the final category, Game of the Year. This is reserved for the best of the best, and there were 4 games that were truly special. So, let's begin. Coming out of nowhere, Cocoon surprised me with its interesting take on puzzles, high level of polish, and striking art style. Warping between worlds was not only fun, but it took us to cool locations. From the stark, dry deserts to lush and humid swamps, the worlds were as unique as they were visually appealing. The excellent soundtrack and sound design also made each place feel different, and the evolution of the puzzles kept the game progressing in an interesting way. The narrative leaves a little bit to be desired, but for such a short and compact game, it can be forgiven. As the debut title from Geometric Interactive, this was one of the year's best releases. In the midst of a fighting game renaissance, Street Fighter's strong legacy, creative innovation, and low barrier of entry saw it poised to take prime position in the fighting game world. The launch roster had some of our favorite fighters take on flashy newcomers with interesting personalities, movesets, and mechanics. The online play is very strong with good netcode, allowing more players to duke it out with smoother connections even across different regions. The World Tour mode introduced us to a robust story that gave us more insight into the lore than ever before. And the character creator also gave players the freedom to create monstrosities to show off in the Battle Hub. With more updates, continued support, and new characters added regularly, Street Fighter VI should have a long life ahead of it. 2023 was also a very strong year for horror games, so it should come as no surprise to see Alan Wake 2 on the shortlist for Game of the Year. And while it didn't win, it was still a great entry into Remedy's universe. Alan Wake 2 is visually stunning, using cutting-edge technology that I was expecting much sooner in this generation. The sound design and music was amazing, and narratively, this stands near the top. The mix of in-game and live-action cutscenes really makes this one of the most immersive experiences. And that brings us to the Game of the Year, but before that, for anyone curious, had Star Wars Jedi Survivor released in an acceptable state, this is where I would have placed it, which is a shame for an otherwise great game. But without any more delay, here's my Game of the Year. Although this is a remake of an already great game, it does more than just apply a fresh coat of paint on a rusty car. The RE engine not only utilizes new lighting and shading techniques, but also revamps an outdated game design. Even though it holds up well enough today, those who have played the original know that it can be improved. The combat has been modernized, and the story's pacing was streamlined to take out much of the dead air. You can now walk and shoot at the same time, parry with your knife, and sort your attaché case with greater ease. New cutscenes shine a light on characters that were more or less ignored in the original, and the actors' performances brought them to life. There's no doubt in my mind that the storytelling in the remake is miles better than the original. The sound design was amazing, and all of the weapons felt great to use. The content cut from the base game was included in the Separate Ways DLC, which follows the events of RE4 from Ada's point of view. The base game was already a winner for me, but when combined with Separate Ways, we now get the entire story in a nice package. If you've played the original, you'll undoubtedly recognize many things, but the developers also threw in new obstacles that kept veterans on their toes. From the massive combat overhaul to the much improved storytelling, Resident Evil 4 is my Game of the Year. Thank you so much for watching. That wraps up 2023, and so too concludes my Game Awards. Here are all the titles mentioned in this video. Let me know your favorite games of the year and which ones disappointed you the most. I'll also be putting out more reviews soon, so let me know if there are any games you want to see. Again, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.